Let's go to Cape Town now, where protests and the illegal occupation of land are taking place in Strand. In Somerset West, demonstrators have apparently taken over land opposite a local school. The N2 highway has been closed for part of the day. Our reporter Ati Mtongana live in that area for us this hour. Hi there, Ati. What is going on there now? When we went to you, I think about an hour ago, there was a lot of palpable anger among the people who were erecting shacks there. Have they now dispersed?
That is still the case, Temegile. In fact, they've moved further into the community now, where they are holding a community mass meeting where they're deliberating on their next move. However, you have a huge contingency of law enforcement agencies together with the anti-land invasion Red Ants here on standby. But I must tell you, Temegile, that there are three particular pieces of land that are in question here. There's one that is owned by a private individual. There's one that is owned by provincial government, and there's one that's owned by Sanwell, which is essentially national government. I have with me on standby, I'll be discussing what the provincial government is planning to do with this particular vacant piece of land which it owns. I'm going to discuss that with the Premier candidate for the Western Cape, Alan Wendy, as well as the MEC for Community Safety. But before I get into conversation with him, I must also mention that where we are standing is very actually close to that particular piece of land, and right across Temegile is a police station here in Rwandle, where you have foreign nationals currently camping there in fear of what might happen to them, because we've heard reports that some of their shops have been looted as a result of the violence and the protests that have been happening here in Rwandle. Now, going into conversation with Mr. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us. Now, let's talk about this particular piece of land which the province owns. What are you planning to do with the situation, because residents have started erecting structures on it?
So, of course, these pieces of land, and it's this one that we do own and the next one that they're busy in a final contractual space, these pieces of land are for housing, and these are for people that are on the waiting list. And of course, here you've got this land issue where people are trying to claim land, and it's very complex, but quite frankly, we need the rule of law. We've got a constitution that says you've got the right to protest, you've got the right to hear your voice, or let us hear your voice. Let's have those discussions, but really you don't have the right to interrupt a process where you're taking actually someone else's right away, someone who's going to be allocated that next house, or even closing the N2. You know, when that's taking other people's rights away, that's cutting into the economy, that's taking jobs away, businesses are closed, etc. So we really need to find ways in which we need to deal harshly where laws are really broken. We need to understand also that I think much of this, I feel, is being politically motivated, and we've got some evidence now that we've laid in, and I've actually asked the police that they need to now please make some arrests.
What evidence? Can you elaborate on that?
So I've got some video evidence that we can see certain political leaders. I'm not going to mention names, but...
Which political parties are they from?
I'm actually going to leave that as well, but there are 2 or 3 political parties that are involved in this region. So we right here in Luandle, but today there was shut down for maybe other leadership and other reasons in Khayelitsha. We've seen what's been happening in Caledon. We've seen what's happening just up the road here in Salaris Pass. The same thing in Grabo, and you find these different political parties and political leaders really pushing the boundaries, and I think sweeping up emotions, and I mean that's really just not acceptable. Putting people's lives in danger because you're confrontational with the police when you cause this kind of protest.
Well, you say it's politically motivated. Well, what about the residents here who are being driven to fight for land, and the fact that, I mean, when I spoke to Temegile about an hour ago, I was standing around residents who you could sense the anger. It was so palpable when they were speaking, and they were saying that, and you're saying that this is a complex matter, but how do you break that down for residents who live in densely populated areas where, you know, the living conditions are very dire? How do you explain that to them, and how do you stop them from doing what they're doing, even though you're saying it's politically motivated and might be illegal?
So, of course, that's where you need to have dialogue and discussion. And so we've got housing MECs, we've got processes, we've got lists. We've got high demand. Of course, we've got high demand, and more people are coming here for opportunities as we're developing more and more properties and buying up more land and building more and more houses. People coming here not only for houses, for healthcare, for education, for jobs. And of course, we've got to try and cater for that extra demand, but we need to do it properly. We need to understand that when we burn and we break and we put people's lives at risk, that is not the way that's not the South Africa that we really want to see.
One of the issues that the residents brought up is that land ownership does not favor a lot of black South Africans, and they were mentioning how they live in these poor living conditions, and right across are huge estates that are owned by predominantly white affluent people. What is the plan? Because also another issue is how they were mentioning that there's slow pace of service delivery. Yes, you've earmarked this particular piece of land for housing, but how long will it take? Because in the mind of a black person who lives in a shack and who's seen this vacant piece of land for years, for them it does not make sense why it's taking so long for them to be given what they say is rightfully theirs.
Correct. And I mean, when you build 200,000 houses over your term of office, and you've got a 500,000-600,000 waiting list, and of course 5 years later you've taken the 200,000 off, but you've still got a 500,000-600,000 rand wait. There's a 600,000 people waiting list. I mean, this is really a difficult situation. Whether it's here in the Western Cape, because we're attracting, or in Johannesburg or Tshwane, which we see the same kind of thing happening. These are the demands that are put on government, and it's about finding those solutions, apportioning the budget. Do you take away from education to put more into housing, and these are the big balancing factors, and trying to get that discussion going with communities so that people understand. Because quite frankly, this piece of land to be developed, it's going to get services put in. If people invade the land, then we know what it's like to try and move people off the land to put the services back in. That's very, very difficult, or almost never happens. So we really have to get into a proper process of making sure that we understand here is the demand. And of course, we say, people here, when you interview them, they will say exactly that. We've been waiting for a home. Just go a little bit further down the road and you'll go into Mitchell's Plain and you'll hear people saying, but we've been waiting calmly for 20 years on the list. Where's our houses? I mean, these demands are all over the place, and these are the conundrums that a government has got to deal with. But you can see our allocation gets spent every single year. We've got to make sure that we find ways in which we can find more money to create more opportunity. But I think that's got to be balanced directly with the number of jobs you can create, because quite frankly, if we really think about South Africa, and if everyone's going to get a free house, it's never going to happen in South Africa. We've got to find economic growth, jobs, get the engine room running of our country, so that we can actually start to find real mechanisms of people to find their own opportunities in this.
Two more questions, Mr. Wendy. The issue in Culloden, 2 protesters died there as a result of the march that they held, marching to the local municipality. Do you preempt something of that nature here? Because we're seeing armed anti-land invasion officers as well as police, and the IPID is actually looking into that particular incident to look at who actually fired those shots that killed the 2 young men. Do you preempt that there will be something like this here? Because there have been running battles between law enforcement agencies and the residents who are adamant that they will continue what they're doing, even though there is a whole lot of police on the ground to make sure that they don't continue with illegally erecting structures.
And of course, this is where the complexity comes in of the situation, where you've got police and public order police on the one side. They get called in because of the disruption on the other side, and people protesting and burning tires and blocking roads. And that's why I call on the leaders who are actually stoking up the emotions. Let's rather have leaders that want to discuss things, then stoke up emotions. And straight away, when you stoke up these emotions and start burning tires, you put people into conflict. And then the risk is there. And of course, it's tragic that people lose their life in this kind of space. I mean, we've all fought for this country that says, let's build a future, this rainbow nation. And you've got a right, as I said, to protest. But then that protest goes haywire, and that confrontation. So I call on those leaders to be real leaders. We're going into an election campaign and an election on the 8th of May. Burning and stoking up people is not the right way to try and grow your political party.
Lastly, quickly, MEC, before I let you go, what is going to happen with regards to that privately owned land? As the residents were saying, is it not possible for, the provincial government to approach the private owner to buy it and so they can develop it for housing?
I actually believe that privately owned land is actually, they want to develop that property anyway for housing. So I think it's for exactly the same need. So whether it's the only land that's not available for housing is the Sunral land, because that is for the long-term plan of the expansion for the economy of this N2. And of course they're in exactly the same boat. They've got to call in public order policing, break down shacks. This is confrontation again, and this kind of confrontation we don't need.
All right, thank you very much, Premier Candidate of the Western Cape, as well as the MEC for Community Safety, Alan Wendy there. I must also mention that road closures have also been in effect here on the N2, and we understand that it is still actually closed, and motorists will be told when to actually use this particular road. Back to you in studio.
Atim Tonga, live for us in Strand.